F1 is dying. I'm sure you have heard this exact statement or some variation of it during this season. It seems that most people are inclined to believe that the sport is withering away this year due to a variety of reasons. A common criticism you have probably seen this year is that F1 is artificial now. These new regs introduced in 2026 have batteries, and these batteries are semi-automated and deliver a whole load of power. And because of this, we do see many overtakes where drivers are forced to defend or attack at any moment, which some see as artificial and not real racing. Another criticism you'll also hear is how the look of the sport is dead. It's just sponsor slop with some quiet ass EV engines that need to be louder. These two seem to be the main basis for the rhetoric that F1 is dead, but I asked something else. Is it really? Because looking at the numbers, F1 has never been more popular. There are more fans than ever before. There are more F1 collaborations than ever before. More people are just straight up talking about the sport than ever before. To any casual fan, the sport is not dead in the slightest. Well, did you catch that though? To any casual fan. Casual fans I would define as those who watch the sport and do it again when a weekend is done. They don't go look for other F1 content when a weekend is over. They don't really think about the sport when there's downtime. They just tune in and watch what they can. This, I would say, is also about 80 to 90% of F1 fans as well. Most sports and things like this in general are like this, since if everyone who watched the sport cared about it enough to the point they were watching F1 content every single week, I, along with many other YouTubers in this niche, would get like 2 million views per video at least. So my point is, everyone who is saying F1 is dead are likely dedicated fans who do think about the sport past the weekends and all of its history and what have you. So to the dedicated fans, is the sport dead? Let us go and find out. I'm going to look at a variety of issues, specifically with the regulations, issues with logistics that are especially present this year, issues with marketing, issues sprouted from the drivers themselves, before answering the elusive question, is F1 dead? Subscribe if car goes vroom, and let's get to quacking now.
A good weather for a race, but especially for a dog.
So like I said, let's begin with talking about the issues with the current regulations. This seems to be everyone's biggest gripe this year, since I'm sure you have heard the term artificial racing in 2026. Artificial racing seems to be defined by racing between cars that is not fully in the driver's hands. When the car has mechanisms and other bits on it for the sole purpose of aiding racing, it is then considered artificial, and any racing that comes from it is of course artificial racing. This year, that term is applicable to the batteries and the engine side of things, since F1 is trying to break barriers. The sport is going to conquer climate change and make the sport greener, everybody. They have developed a sweet new sustainable fuel, but no one cares. They split the engine power 50-50 between energy and combustion. The new batteries in the car are so powerful that it can sustain this split with zero problems whatsoever. Yeah, of course there are issues. Silver clipping is a big one, which happens when the batteries run out of juice before a braking zone, which is basically 50% of the engine now dead and slows the cars down dramatically even if they're on a straight. The batteries recharge quick, but also die quick, too quick in fact, and is basically ruining qualifying. Quali is all about going as fast as possible, of course, so when drivers have to constantly lift and coast and not drain the battery as quick, it is obviously terrible to watch. And in the races, they are semi-automated in the sense of the battery has sensors and programs that tells it when to recharge and when to deploy. This is nothing new. This has been a feature of hybrid batteries since their introduction in 2014. The only reason why it is an issue now is because with the battery so fast and powerful, depending on how a driver exits a corner or whatnot, the battery can think the driver is pushing and deploy battery power and basically force them to overtake when they did not want to. This sounds good in theory, but sometimes drivers don't want to overtake at a spot since there is a better one later on the track. By forcing them to overtake, they leave themselves extremely susceptible for a counterattack, and if their battery is drained, then defending is essentially non-existent. Back from 2014 and 2025, this was not a problem since the battery power was much lower and easier to predict and control from the driver's side of things. Now, it is much faster and harder to predict, and it is throwing drivers off massively. F1 are not idiots, however. They know that this is making the drivers and fans mad, so they are implementing changes such as the minor ones in Miami, and also promise that in 2027, the battery and combustion split will be adjusted to favor more combustion power instead of battery. So that basically covers the regs, since aside from the new batteries, everything else is actually well liked from the driver, such as the new cars and the active aero. This does not mean there are no more issues though, since of course, we have issues with the calendar as well. This section could be much shorter since this is an issue exclusive to 2026. or at least I hope. As of writing, round 5 is going to be in Canada in a couple of days, but it was supposed to be round 7. The original rounds 4 and 5 were set to be in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, but got cancelled due to the war. This left a ginormous gap between rounds 3 and now the new round 4 in Miami, and considering how rounds 1 to 3 happened in the span of about 4 weeks, it's fair to say a lot of hype has died down. And even when Miami came back and everyone was excited again, it did not stay like that for long, since Miami to Canada had a further 3-week gap as well. So with there being little F1 racing to watch, naturally people get bored, and with the only stories coming out about the sport being very negative ones, people are thinking less favorably of the sport. And that's just one side of the spectrum too, since depending on how things go, we can see the complete opposite side of it at the end of the year. Bahrain may be cancelled entirely, but a race that I'm not so sure will be is the Saudi Arabian race. They really want their race to go ahead and are willing to pay big money to have it happen at all costs, which is leading to the idea of a quadruple header taking place back to back in the last 4 rounds. With F1 staff already being drained and exhausted at the end of the year, imagine the 4 back-to-back race gauntlet being their ticket on the way out. I can't imagine they will all be too happy. It's happened before where triple headers were the season ticket out. The staff and drivers always complain that F1 thinks they are puppets to be displayed instead of actual people who should be thought about. This leads to negative articles coming out, and once again, the fans losing hope in the sport. So too few races are bad, too many races are bad, and where most seasons only see this happening once, sometimes not at all, 2026 could see both of these realities, well, be reality. Wonderful. And the crazy thing is, that issue could also be related to the next one, that being marketing. We know F1 loves a good marketing campaign. Drive to Survive, the F1 movie, the countless collaborations with other clothing brands. They love to promote the shit out of the sport. And you can say what you want about all of them, especially Drive to Survive, but they have undeniably aided in the sport having more fans. Remember, most of them are casual fans, and how are they ever going to be dedicated if 1, they did not have an entry point, and 2, continue to watch every single weekend? So harassing them for being not a real fan makes you seem like a miserable prick, and the reason why many already do not like the F1 community to begin with. Back on topic though, F1 loves their marketing, and something they're starting to do is on the weekends. How do we get more F1 for our time? Sprint race sessions. Instead of the usual 3 practice quali race day format, some weekends will be called sprint weekends, where it's 1 practice, sprint quali, sprint race quali, and then race day. The sprint sessions are basically the main qualifyings and races, but shorter and for less points. This is not unheard of. Many, if not all, junior series run like this. But see, that's the thing. It makes sense for junior series to run like this, since that has more opportunity to grow, which could lead to wildly different sprint and main races. F1, and I know it may seem crazy sometimes, F1 is not an amateur series. These drivers probably know how to race cars, so what ends up happening in the sprints is basically the same thing we will see on Sunday. Sometimes they do produce different races, such as Miami last year, where 1 was wet and 1 was dry, but you cannot have that every single weekend. And if anything, sometimes the sprints are really good, but that's thanks to the short format, which makes the drivers inclined to push hard. The main sessions are much longer than the sprints, of course, which adds a management aspect that the sprints simply did not have. So while the sprints may be good, the main stuff won't be, which sours the weekend, since not only do we already know the running order for the main race, but also have nothing to watch for it, since the sprints raised our expectations higher than any main race could ever achieve. Fans generally don't like the sprints, and F1 seeing this are like, fuck yeah dude, let's get some more. They justify this by saying, the numbers don't lie, people watch the sprints, so thus we will do more sprints. Of course, they don't look at the actual reviews of the sprints where people overwhelmingly disapprove of them, but that don't matter. The FI and F1 have proven time and time again that they don't actually hear what the fans want. They look at the numbers and go off of that, which could lead to a bigger series, sure, but not a dedicated fan base that is truly passionate for it. It is a dangerous slippery slope that I could only hope the few people with reason in the organization can avoid. Finally, let us discuss the drivers themselves. Going back to the reg issues, the drivers don't like the batteries for previously mentioned reasons. This has led to most, if not every single one of them, going on interviews saying how they straight up dislike the cars. You even have some, such as Lando Norris, and more notably Max Verstappen, saying how if nothing changes, changes, they will leave the sport altogether. So despite the good racing on our screens, when the drivers come out and say no, that is not real racing, naturally the fans are inclined to believe them since they are the racists. Of course they know how racing works. And I'm not denying that. However, I need everyone to understand something. A driver's idea of racing is nothing like the fans' idea of racing. For years, basically since 2014, fans have begged for on-edge and unpredictable racing that is enjoyable to watch. 2021 had that thanks to a reg change that shaved off floor bits that made Mercedes so good and introduced a budget cap to close up the competition. 2022, however, had another reg change and it was actually good for a while. Competition was shaken up, teams were fighting, the title was highly contested, but only for a while thanks to a mid-season reg change that basically made the regs null and easier to exploit, where Red Bull took the opportunity in 2023 with the single best season ever by a team and driver. And while 2024 and 25 did feature closer fights, the racing was still poor thanks to the regs being neutered. 2026 of course see these new regulations that have shaken up the competition and led to closer racing. Contrary to the F1 Twitter and Reddit bubble, most fans actually do like the racing since again, they are casual. The drivers of course don't like the racing, leading to the dedicated one saying the drivers are right and the racing sucks ass. But you have it backwards, my friend. In my eyes, F1 has an equilibrium between the driver's experience of the sport and the fans' experience of the sport that must be met as close as possible. This year, the fan side of things is very high with engaging racing. However, the driver side of things is very low with close competition thanks to batteries and what have you. And just a couple years ago in 2023, it was the exact opposite, with the fan side of things being very low with boring racing and the driver side of things being very high with super fast cars that were too fast to be competitive. Ideally, both of these things should be as close as possible. An example I think of are the regs from years like 2012. The fans were given engaging racing while the drivers were given decent enough cars to not complain about it. 2021 is also another example of this equilibrium being met. So my point is, don't just blindly believe a driver's opinion on any regulations, especially if they dislike them and want to change things. Their wants and needs are completely opposite of your wants and needs, and if the sport was molded in the eyes of drivers like Max and Lando, it would be so incredibly boring. However, our experience should also not be too skewed since it could lead to superficial racing that becomes obvious when you look between the lines. 2026 has some ways to go if it is to meet this equilibrium I just explained, and luckily for you, I have hope they eventually will. So guys, is F1 dead? Well, my answer entirely depends on the type of person you are. If you are a casual fan who watches the sport, then no, F1 is pretty great right now. However, if you are a dedicated fan who has a favorite team and driver and watches content in F1 along with learning about its histories and whatnot, then maybe F1 is dying. As a dedicated fan myself, I would be lying if I said I was entirely happy with where the sport is right now. I love the new regs personally, but even I can admit when something was too soon. Can we have a 50-50 power split? Absolutely, but not right now since there are still far too many issues. Can we have batteries in the cars? Absolutely, but right now they are too overbearing in the sport and does sour things a little. Luckily, F1 knows this since they're floating around the idea in 2030 or 2031 to reduce battery power significantly and bring back good old engine power, still on a sustainable fuel that has at least been a success. But even if they do that, would F1 be back? I actually think no. See, something I failed to mention is how F1 has low-key become a trend. With things like Drive to Survive and other bits, many people have become dedicated fans from those sources as much as they like to say they didn't, and while they love the sport, they are losing interest. When something is so popular, it doesn't keep on rising. Eventually, it falls off even if nothing bad has happened. I think the fact that these new regs are so controversial is making people realize that they weren't so dedicated to the sport as they maybe thought they were and are now looking for the next big sport to become a fan of. My prediction is that endurance racing will be just that, since with Max's ventures in the Nürburgring, many people have now openly said, people who you thought were dedicated, knowledgeable racing fans, that maybe F1 isn't the best motorsport. Anyone who is an actual motorsport fan knows F1 has never been the best motorsport, and if it has, not by much, even in years like 2021. I think that gradually we're going to see endurance racing rise in fans into F1 now being not not the only racing series that is well known, and I have no idea if this is a good thing. Because on one hand, yay, more racing fans. On the other, more fans who participate in F1 fan wars and other immature shit will be in other forms of racing that, in my opinion, will lessen the impact of the racing. I fear a reality where after watching a great race from a non-F1 series, the same fan war behavior we see in F1 will start to happen to people like fucking Dan Harper or Alex Palau, and soon enough, the only thing we'll see out of these communities are fan wars instead of people, I don't know, actually talking about and enjoying the racing. I hope that everything I have just said will not come to fruition, but given the trend-like behavior we see with many F1 fans and Max opening them up to other forms of racing, I do have a little bit of fear. Before we go though, I do want to mention how I would fix the sport. Sure, maybe the fans are too far gone and unpredictable, but if I were FIA president, here are some things I would do. Firstly, I would limit every calendar to no more than 20 races, ideally between 18 to 20 per year. Again, too little F1 is bad, too much F1 is bad. Let's find that sweet spot. Secondly, introduce a push to pass system akin to the one in IndyCar to F1 and have that be the overtaking aid instead of complicated batteries. You have 200 seconds of push to pass for the entire race. Use it wisely. Also, let's make the engines V8 since, as someone who goes outside to actual races, V10s and especially V12s hurt my little ears, and no, I'm not wearing earplugs. Finally, my most controversial take probably, significantly slow the sport down. The slower a motorsport is, the better racing it produces naturally. F1 can still be the fastest motorsport, but maybe by like 1 second instead of 10. It would really aid the racing, and I believe that is a solution people would love, I think. So those are my thoughts on the state of the sport. Things are not looking good right now, but I'm sure once we are back to normal of 2 to 3 races per month, people will be happy again. A lack of races highlights negative media, which leads people to believing the end of the world is near or something. So let's just relax and watch some good old racing, okay? Anyways, I want to give a quick shout out to all members of the flock for the continued support, and make sure to join if you all cool benefits as well as just helping me out. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like and subscribe since it really helps me out, and make sure to let me know in the comments what you think of this. And as always, have an amazing day.
Good weather for the duck.